Okay, I'm going to keep this one a little shorter and sweeter than normal. It's really strange the timing of everything going on in the world in the Middle East, and how I've just been releasing some of my videos about how I can't stand Jewish culture, their history, their mythical literature, how they murdered Jesus and everything else. I really don't like that. But what bothers me the most is how many Christians in America, they call themselves Christians, but they're actually Jews. Now, I think I may have just recently talked about this in another recording, and basically, they think like Jews. The literature they read, just the Old Testament all the time, is Jewish, and they did not catch or understand what Jesus was teaching. And so what's happened, and I have not heard anybody talk about this, and not to say nobody has, but what I mean is that it's not a mainstream thought or theory, that the majority of Christians, at least in our time, at least in the West, at least in America, are actually Jews. They're of Jewish belief. They call themselves Christians. They'll say some blood ritual with Jesus, blah, blah, and that's it. But they don't hold to his teaching. They don't understand his teaching. They have no relationship with God. I'm reminded of what Jesus said when he said to the Jews who are condemned, "You study the scriptures day and night and think that by doing so you have eternal life. Yet here I am right in front of you and you refuse to come to me to have life." These are people who do not have a relationship with God. They study scriptures. They go to church. Everything is on the surface, but God is not in them. They were not reborn. That's actually the main reason why America is in dire straits, because there are no real Christians, or very few left. Actual Christians, people who follow the Jesus from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, not the God of Numbers or Leviticus. Now, I've talked for many thousands of hours, actually, maybe not uploaded that much, but about the hypocrisy, evils, and inconsistencies of the God of the Old Testament, who's the God of the Jews. Jesus continually exposed this God. I'll give you a quick simple one. It's one of my favorites because it's so simple. Jesus said to the crowd, "Even you guys who are evil, you who are sinners, even you know how to give your own kids good gifts. If your children asked for bread, you wouldn't give them a stone. And if they asked for fish, you wouldn't give them a snake." He was directly attacking the God of the Old Testament in the book of Numbers. The Hebrews were starving. When they asked God for food, they got nothing, which is like a stone. And then when they asked for food again, it said in Numbers that the God of the Old Testament sent venomous snakes to kill them for complaining about starving to death. And Jesus is pointing out to them that the God of the Old Testament is evil, that their God, the God of the Jews, is the devil. And he's telling them, even you guys who are parents would not be that cruel to your own children, and you're not even God. He's like, you guys are evil even. You guys are sinners. Even you aren't as bad as the God of the Old Testament. Jesus was continually condemning the God of the Old Testament. It's everywhere once you have that clue. Go and read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you will find so much that highlights the devil of the Jews, the God of the Jews. Now back to our time period, 2,000 years later. No, but I'm dog sitting. So, sorry, I'm dog sitting these. This is the second day of dog sitting these dogs, and I got one that's like, dude, he is talking. I want to be a part of it, or I need him to play tug of war with me. One or the other. But he better do something, because he's serious about what he's doing. I have family members who think like this. I know people from some of the churches I've been to who think like this. This is a very common thing. They feel obligated to give Israel all their money. And it doesn't matter how much you point out how corrupt their culture is, how atheist their culture is, how homosexuality is completely tolerated there. It's like one of the gay capitals of the world. The cruelties they've inflicted on their neighbors, the Palestinians. Jesus came from the area that is now Palestine. Think about that. But it doesn't matter how much evil you point out that their culture and their way of life and thinking is. They don't care. They see some passage in the Bible, some prophecy somewhere, and they say, well, we have to help them. They're the good guys. When they are so obviously the evil guys. Now, I'm not saying that Iran is the good guys, but I am saying that Israel, in name only, are the bad guys. And that's what I want to get to. I told my aunt, I said, there is such a possibility that Israel, as referred to in the Bible and the prophecies she's referring to, is spiritual, that it's God's people on earth around the world. And it's not literal. It's not a specific, actual, literal nation or city. Did you ever consider that? And she didn't. Obviously. It's frustrating because they're going to get their politicians to support this corrupt state, Israel in name only, with every dollar they can, thinking somehow they've been good Christians by doing that. These people hate Jesus. These people think American Christians are the most foolish people on earth because they want nothing to do with us, just as they don't want anything to do with God, the Father of Jesus. These people are hoping their idea of their Messiah that hasn't come yet, yeah, they're daft too. Their Messiah came 2,000 years ago and they didn't see it because it didn't happen the way they wanted it. Their idea of their Messiah is actually what would be the Christians' idea of Antichrist. And the Christians in America are literally supporting the state that is hoping for Antichrist. How foolish is that? How deceived can you be to do that? Well, that's unfortunately the majority of American Christians. Because like I said, most Christians in America are Jews. And they don't even know it. They're Jews in spirit. They're not born of God's Spirit. They don't have God's Spirit. Everything is intellectual and head knowledge, reading scriptures and traditions and going to church and all this stuff, like robots do. They are not born of God's Spirit. Anybody who denies that Jesus was the Son of God does not have the Father. That's literally right there in the New Testament. Because the Father came into the world as a man named Jesus. God came into the world as a man named Jesus. Now, I hate to be spoiling it for you, but we're 2,000 years in. If you haven't figured it out now, I feel bad for you. If it's the first time you heard that claim, I feel bad for you. But that is the claim, that Jesus was God as a man. He spoke. He let us understood right from wrong, good from evil, how things work, the rules, how forgiveness works, how to make peace with God, how to go to heaven. He rose from the dead to give hope to those who had faith. Had he not risen from the dead, we would not be talking to him to this day. He would just be a moral teacher of his time, just as Muslims claim. Muslims claim that Jesus was just a prophet and just a guy, just a moral teacher, and they don't believe any of his miracles happened. But that doesn't make any sense because the entire Christian church, its birth, was formed on the basis of his resurrection. People were going to martyrs' deaths in the belief that Jesus rose from the dead. Why would they be doing that if he didn't do that? So this is my problem with Islam, is they belittle Jesus. He was God as a man, and he was sufficient. He didn't need other people to come do his job for him afterwards. And this is why you can't be both Muslim and Christian. The level of ignorance when I hear people say, I'm a Christian and a Muslim and a Jew. I'm like, you are confused. You clearly don't know what any of those mean. I read from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's where I've gotten my food. That's what feeds me. Everything else is, to me, suspect. Even parts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, I sometimes wonder now and then by how the scribes handled Scripture. How many agendas were going on in the time. Look at the book of Revelation. Even the author himself, at the very end of his own written work, he has to say, nobody butcher this. Nobody add things to this. Nobody subtract things from this, or else. He's saying that because that is a serious problem in that time. So when I say I'm really skeptical of a lot of things written in that time, that is a healthy skepticism. Okay, but I've read it all for decades throughout my life. I've considered it. I've narrowed it down to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Especially Matthew, especially Luke. That's my personal choice. That's my faith. My faith is that Jesus was God as a man, that he rose from the dead. And he taught us how to find forgiveness with God, how to go to heaven. That's literally all that matters. I could literally drop the mic on that, and that's it. So back to the original subject that started this recording. How does supporting a war criminal and evil state over in the Middle East have anything to do with your relationship with God and salvation? I'm asking this because there's a lot of confused Jews who call themselves Christians. They know that there's a lot of things wrong. They're always offended by things. They've probably tuned out by now. They're afraid. They're afraid of Jesus as his Father. They really are. They don't want to come into the light. Some of them It's like they're incapable of asking for forgiveness. They have pride, kind of like President Trump answered the question when they asked him, have you ever asked God for forgiveness? He said he didn't really think it's necessary. He said just do better next time. So his answer is no. He's never asked God for forgiveness. Doesn't believe it's necessary. That's Trump. He's not a Christian, guys. You know why they think he's a Christian? Because he's bought and paid for by Israel. Because he's a puppet for Israel. That's why American Christians, for whatever reason, they just think Trump is a Christian, despite there being no evidence of that. In the things he says or the way he lives, zero evidence. But they think he's a Christian. Why? Mostly hope. It's just false hope that they're giving themselves, but it's also because he supports Israel and they are actually Jews. Most Christians in America are actually Jews. And they don't even know it.